Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Administering SQL Server 2012 Jumpstart. My name is Rich Curry. I am here with Mr. George Squillace. He's got SQL in the name. Good morning, George.
Hey, good morning, Rich.
How about a little bit about yourself, sir?
All righty. Well, I come from New Horizons, Great Lakes, based in Michigan. I've been a long-term technology trainer, been a long-term Microsoft certified trainer. Of the last bunch of years, my focus has solely been on SQL Server, which I like. Rich, can I brag on you a little?
Yeah, go
I
for
want to
it.
brag on you, and well, maybe that's not the right word, but some of you are here for the specific purpose of certifying, preparing to certify, icing off that particular preparation process. One good thing, we've passed all 7 SQL 2012 exams.
Oh, yeah.
And I know you've sat in the exam booth an awful lot of times.
Nowhere near what you have, though, George.
96 times in the exam booth.
Mr. Professional Test Taker right there.
So for
That's
those...
hard to do, let me tell you.
So for those that are in particular interested in that area, you're going to have a good day. A bit of other background too. Now, how about you?
Well, I have been a trainer with Microsoft Technologies for about the last 10 years with New Horizons. And prior to that, spent about 20 years in industry, have been playing with computers since I was 10 years old, and we're not going to tell you when that started because that would tell you how old I am, and I'm not going to do that. Have been a DBA professionally, a developer, and a bunch of other stuff, and hopefully some of that experience is going to come across and help you folks out this day. So, George, how about it? What are we going to be doing today? You want to give us an overview?
Excellent. I like this product. I just want to go on the record saying I like the product. One of the things that I like about it is that this product is huge. And we have an awful lot to take a look at in terms of administration. So we'll take a look first at how we get the product on a box and some of the installation decisions along the way.
Okay.
Module 2, after we get the product on the box, now what? What are some of the server level, database level settings and things that we do? What are some maintenance tasks that we do? Because the product does need some care and feeding. SQL Server operates in a dynamic environment, and things are always changing, and we need to figure out what's going on, improve performance, troubleshoot. So we'll take a look at some tools in that area.
I'm looking forward to that one because I haven't done a lot of troubleshooting. I just don't tend to have problems.
Oh, there you go. So then we'll take a look at managing data. After that, a module of particular concern, implementing security.
Okay.
So we'll see the various onion layers of security, the moving parts of the security subsystem, and then again, a pet favorite topic of mine, and that is high availability.
Yeah,
so we have
a good one.
We have a lot of high availability options, and
Awesome.
So we're going to take a decent survey of those.
Awesome.
And you will want to
Sounds
have a good overview survey of those before the exam. Alrighty, setting expectations. This particular jumpstart would serve a number of people. Those that already have some experience with SQL Server, you still have plenty to learn. We'll definitely cover an awful lot of topics. You're going to pick up something. There are those who all of a sudden now sit in front of a SharePoint server or some other box that requires the SQL Server product. We call them an accidental DBA. You're going to find you have lots to gain from this as well.
There are a lot of those out there, too.
Oh, no doubt. I mean, so many Microsoft products now require a SQL Server and other third-party products as well.
Yep.
And after that, those that have a laser focus on passing that 70-462 certification exam.
Absolutely.
Some suggested materials to help you out and to describe the person who will be in the best position to succeed. Got to have basic familiarity with the product. Our session here is designed for those that have at least some exposure to the product and definitely relational database exposure too.
Makes sense.
Also, if you are brand new to Windows and the user interface and things like that, this will be a tougher session. So got to have some Windows Server experience.
Okay.
Book-wise.
Okay, so with the books, we've actually got Microsoft Press, the exam training kit for the 70-462, Administering SQL Server 2012 Databases is a great resource. And additionally, if you like what you're hearing today and you want some more foundation, there is a 5-day Microsoft official curriculum course, the 10775 class. That class is offered by the folks that we train for, so you might actually get a chance to spend 5 whole days with us. That would be New Horizons. If you go to the Microsoft Learning site and search on classes, you'll get more information there as well. So, George, how about that MVA community? We've already been a part of that a little bit, right?
No doubt, no doubt. Big online community.
It is. It is. Lots of folks, lots of things to learn, and you get points. If you log in and use this voucher code, which is admin SQL, not DWSQL. The slide has a little bit of an issue there. So, admin SQL is the correct code. Put that in. It expires on November 19th, and you will get 50 MVA points. So, George, you ready to get started here? Should give these folks something to think about for
Let's
the
roll.
day? All right. So, this first module, go at it, bud.
Alrighty, so first module, installation and configuration of SQL Server. We can't get into the really grimy detail of all the decision making that you have to do, so we want to take maybe a treetop or a little higher level look at the major decisions along the way, and in particular, some of the critical decisions along the way. So in addition to installation decisions, we have an I/O bound product.
Okay.
So we have to design storage well.
That makes sense.
There are certain particular errors that a DBA can make in relationship to growth, storage, etc. So we have to lay those out on the table as well.
Absolutely.
And always being security concerned and efficiency concerned, we want to scope the appropriate service accounts for running the SQL Server product.
All right, so let's get into that first topic, installation decisions. George, what do we need to know about installing the product? What are the critical points?
Sure. Well, first off, we have a lot of decisions to make. There's quite a number of wizard steps in installing the product, and it's not that it's hard. It's not hard. As a matter of fact, could you? Yeah, that's fine. It's not that it's hard to install the product, but you just have to know what decisions you have to make. And there are a couple that are very hard to overcome if you don't make the decision right the first time around. And also, should you make certain decisions poorly, you're going to have a poor foundation.
So it's like the old carpenter's rule. Measure twice, cut once.
Exactly.
Cool.
Exactly. Alrighty, so installation decisions. We'll take a look. Yeah, we're good. Let's go on to determine the appropriate hardware. Thank you. All right, so laying out some of the hardware decisions. Should we virtualize or not?
Yeah, that's a question that has been going around with a lot of DBAs for a long time. Virtualization has always been viewed as not really a great choice for SQL Server, but the reality is that in the last several years, virtualization's come a long way. And it has really gotten to the point where virtualization versus hard systems, very little difference. Is that what you see as well, George?
Yeah. Clearly the trend is towards virtualization of SQL Server. Maybe not every single workload. You'll have to carefully consider that. But where it used to be a crime or a sin, that's clearly not the case anymore. Now, for CPU sockets and cores, the balancing act with hardware in general is that you want to make sure the workload can be handled. Whatever workload SQL Server has to do, you got to have the hardware to handle it, but I don't want to give away a lot of money either.
This,
of course, is one of the reasons that has been moving us in the direction of virtualization. We could use our hardware much better.
Okay.
Memory-wise, a lot of times this is a function of the Windows operating system, especially for the highest editions. So SQL Server is a memory-loving product. It serves query code or answers queries out of memory, so the more memory in general, the better.
Good.
Storage-wise, you have questions there too.
Absolutely.
So for maybe a smaller shop, you might have one SQL Server, a handful of SQL servers. Not going to be worthwhile to have storage area network-oriented storage. You'll have direct attached storage, and you'll have to manage that per server. But for a larger shop, 20, 50, 100 instances, you're not going to manage storage server by server.
No, you're going to have a block of disks that's available to everybody. So,
Yep. Another trend we're seeing is the increasing use of solid-state storage. I have a link here where you can take a look at maybe some of the places where that could apply, but it's something that needs to be put on the table, especially for some of the heavier workloads.
absolutely.
And Rich, you pointed out something yesterday while we were just chit-chatting and stuff about solid-state storage.
Yeah, one of the things that you do need to kind of be aware of with solid-state storage is that it does have a life cycle. With all of the read-write cycles that go on, there is a tendency for it to wear out, so you do need to be aware that solid-state, in the case of TempDB, it's a trade-off. You can have some performance advantages from having the speed, but there are also some maintenance issues that you need to deal with to make sure that it doesn't run out and wear out while you're dealing with it. So that's really what's going on in that area right now.
Great. For those that are going to have the very heaviest of workloads, consider a couple of free tools that are unsupported. By the way, did I say free and unsupported?
Yeah, they kind of go together sometimes.
So you're on your own for those. But these, let's say you're considering a workload running on a particular hardware platform. Maybe you can persuade your vendor to drop something off for you to test. Without having to install SQL Server, you can run these particular tools, which simulate different kinds of I/O patterns and can tell you if this particular platform is good for the job or not.
Awesome. So what about the operating systems? I mean, is there something that you have to deal with OS selection in there?
Oh, yeah.
Really?
Oh, yeah.
What might that be, sir?
Yeah, well, you have to make sure that you have the right Windows operating system for the job as well. There are certain features that are operating system bound. From this slide, I'd like to make a primary point. In general, whatever Windows client you have,
Yep.
or whatever Windows server you have, one way or another, you can get SQL Server on the machine.
So it's really more of a matter of choosing the right OS for the situation that you're in, rather than to support SQL Server.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah,
good.
definitely.
That's good.
All right, now, an innovation with SQL 2012. I don't know if this is considered earth-shattering by the community or not, but Server Core has been around for a while now,
Yep.
and SQL Server supports Windows Core.
Awesome. That's great.
Funny nickname for Windows Core.
Uh-oh.
Windows without Windows.
Ooh, I like that. I like that.
From a detail standpoint, I would not bother memorizing what the max memory, CPU sockets, what versions of or editions of SQL go on what editions of Windows. Don't bother with all that.
So what you're saying is basically any hardware out there is going to have the ability to run SQL. It's just configuring for what the specific data load is going to be.
Exactly.
Good.
So let's take a look at selecting the appropriate edition of SQL, which in my mind is a particularly important decision.
All right.
It basically goes like this. I'm either budget limited, so I'm going to spend the money that I have, or I'm feature driven and I have to get whatever edition has the features I absolutely need.
Okay.
What would be considered the Cherry edition?
Oh, the Cherry Edition, it's enterprise.
Well, no doubt.
Anytime you've got a full workload and you need to do everything, it's enterprise.
No doubt. So I have a link here for you to take a look at an edition comparison. Often I'll ask myself, well, wait a second, this minute feature, is that supported on this edition or that? I don't remember, and I don't want to remember.
No.
So I have the link here. You'll see there are the principal editions, Enterprise, BI, and Standard. And if you want to download an edition to play with that's time limited, well, I have a link for you there. There's a specialized edition, Web, and I want you to be aware of a couple of other editions that might serve you. For a no-cost edition.
Oh, that would be Express.
Express edition. And you know what? It used to be that the predecessor of Express was fairly minimally capable. Express actually can do a lot.
That's
One
good.
CPU, a gig of RAM, but you can have a 10 gig database, comes with GUI tools, can have reporting services. A lot of goodness, Rich.
Okay, but do I have to go out and get a full license if I'm working on developing something and I'm not ready to roll it out or something like that? Is there an alternative I can use there?
In fact, there is. I have linked here a link to the Microsoft Store where you can get Developer Edition. $60. Okay, it's a few pennies.
$60.
Yeah, a few pennies under $60, but absolutely enterprise edition, feature full. One legal restriction, Rich.
What's that?
Of course, there's a legal restriction. You can only have developer connections.
So no production on that one. Very cool. Very cool. So what are these instances all about, George?
Sure. When I am installing SQL Server, I must make a decision at the wizard step that you see here in the screenshot.
Okay.
And that is, do I want to have a default instance or do I want to have a named instance? So there are two aspects here. First, naming and connecting. But the bigger picture here is that I can have more than one instance on a machine. Picture, Rich, that each one has an electric fence around the instance.
So like a boundary.
It's exactly a boundary. So I would have a different SA, a different system administrator for each instance.
Okay.
Okay. Have a different system administrator. I can have different security assignments. I can have different service level agreements, different collations. I've listed a bunch of the reasons on the slide here why I might want to have a separate instance.
So it's more about being able to control how that instance is operating without having to affect other installs that are being used for other purposes.
Precisely.
Cool.
Just a curious fact. No, this isn't important for the test, just curious. Every single edition of SQL Server supports up to 50 instances.
That's a lot. I think that's more than most people are probably going to ever put on a single machine.
Yeah, now you and I both have teenagers, so we know just because you can doesn't mean you should. There
I
you go.
like that, yeah. So one of the things that goes into instances are collations. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. I had one little follow-up thing on instances, and my reigning heavyweight of those instances or those circumstances out in the world that I'm aware of, one of my customers or one of our students, 19 instances in production on one operating system.
That's pushing it.
That seems like that's pushing it to me too.
Absolutely.
Okay, collation. So let me start off with the definition.
Okay.
So a collation is a rule book of text-based sorting and comparison rules. And part of the relevance here is that I must pick a collation. Now, as we were discussing, one thing that's good, during installation, the SQL Server installation will look at the language of your underlying operating system and at least grab you by the nose and make a strong suggestion as to what you should pick.
Okay.
There are still two major decisions, as you can see from the screenshot here, whether I use a legacy SQL collation or a Windows collation. Strangely, a SQL collation is the default, but Windows collations are suggested.
So you can use the legacy or you can use the current ones defined in Windows.
Absolutely.
Good. So can you show us a little bit about that, George? Let's go over and take a look maybe.
I would. So first thing up, we know that you have to make a collation decision. And I want to come up with a corny phrase to help everybody grasp something.
Okay.
And the corny phrase is like begets like.
Okay.
So we'll find then, let me flip over to my demonstration environment.
All righty.
All right. When I install my instance,
Yep.
I stepped in a bear trap.
Okay.
A collation was set at the instance, and I'm able to look at this both in the graphical user interface
All right.
and also in code if I want to.
Okay.
Now, one of the impacts of this is that my tempDB database is going to have the same collation as DAD, so to say, and that is not configurable. One other curious thing, I'd like to point out some of the naming conventions just real quick. Notice that this says it has a SQL collation, that's a prefix, as opposed to a Windows collation. And without getting too gory, we see a couple of other sensitivities here. We see case insensitive, but accent sensitive.
So the CI is case insensitive, the AS means accent sensitive.
Now, do you have memorized the list of all the other sensitivities?
No.
I don't either. But
I remember the I and the S for insensitive and sensitive. That's about as far as my memory goes.
Yeah, same here. So
All right.
let's say now I create a new database with the graphical user interface. I, of course, have to refresh. So I did not, as you see in code, specify a particular collation.
So it assigned one for you?
So guess what happened? Like begets like. It's going to have the same collation as dad.
Alrighty.
And in fact, just so everybody gets to see this, if I wanted to see this in code, well, I have a function that I could use, point to the particular database, and use a function that will return the particular collation of the database that I am currently pointed to.
Okay.
Whoops. All right, next up, do observe that when I create a database, I can specify an override collation. Are your kids just like you?
I hope not.
No, my kids are not just like me. And refreshing my list of databases, I go to my multilingual speak DB, and now, of course, I see the specified collation.
Awesome. So you can change the collation for an individual database if you need it. Do you have finer grain control even?
In fact, I do have finer grain control. And with the code seen here, you'll observe that on a text column by column basis, I can specify the collate clause that will then dictate how text-based comparisons and sorting will work for that particular column.
Awesome.
So following a trail, we now know we have instance collation, we have database collation, and text-based collation.
Okay.
To drill down real quick, I'll go to tables. I see this particular table. I see a column. Let's pick one of these. I'll go to properties, and what do we see? Yep, we see an override collation.
Awesome.
And Rich, you know it goes deeper than that?
Sure it does, because you can actually specify it.
Down to the query level.
Awesome.
So that's what we're going to take a look at next. I'm going to create a table. And if you observe carefully, once again, I'm using per text column collations, one being case insensitive and accent sensitive, and the other being sensitive to both.
Okay, so
All right.
Two different collations, two different columns.
That's right. So notice I'm inserting mixed case data into both of these, which I'll take care of.
All right.
And now, querying the case insensitive data column, I'm now going to query using text data that did not match what was inserted.
Capitals in one,
That's right.
lowercase in the other.
But now when I query that, I actually have a row returned because it is a case insensitive collation.
Awesome.
Let's see where this goes now when I query the case sensitive data column with all lowercase data. You can probably figure out the end of this movie and...
yeah, nothing comes back. No matches found.
All right, drum roll, please.
Okay.
So now we see that I can actually override collation behavior on a per query basis, once again using the collate clause. So I'm querying for the presence of all lowercase data against the case-sensitive data column, but I overrode that with a case-insensitive collation.
Very cool.
Okay, there are a couple other things in here we could take a look at, but that's good for now.
All right. So overall, basically there are some things that you can choose. There are some things that you can't choose. There are other things that you can change if you choose them wrong. So
that's right.
Installation's about trying to get it right the first time, but not being absolutely locked in on everything.
That's right. So
Cool.
certainly with collation, we have some liberty, after the fact.
Yep. Awesome.
That's good.
All right, so then one of the things that we need to take care of also is ensuring that we have all of the storage set up, that we've got somewhere to put our data. Can we talk a little bit more about that?
Let's do that. Good news is, more than ever before in SQL Server, you can set a lot of default locations, as you can see from the screenshot here. And that doesn't mean you can't place files in locations outside of these, but they're just that. They set default. So if I back up data, if I create a new database, I can specify a data and a log file location, things like that.
Okay.
So in this topic, we'll take a look at general file system design principles. We'll also take a look at some advanced database design and the circumstances that may encourage that, and some of the building blocks that go into that.
So what's the first thing that we really need to think about?
Principle number 1.
All right.
Spreading.
Spreading. Don't put all your apples in one basket?
Something like that. So let's take a look at a typical Windows server, SQL Server. It's going to have Windows I/O activity. We'll have data file I/O activity, which is random and also involves reads and writes.
Okay.
And then finally, we have log file activity, which is sequential and write-oriented.
Okay.
One of the biggest I/O taxes is moving that I/O head. So we don't want to move the I/O head, in particular on the log file. And also on the log file, I don't want to have the overhead of RAID parity.
Okay.
So I have here in a diagram a few different file system design suggestions, starting off with a lab machine, which is fictitious. I have everything of importance on one drive letter.
Okay.
Again, just because I can.
Doesn't mean you should.
Doesn't mean I should.
Absolutely.
So then I have a progression of maybe a small, very low workload server up to something that's much more industrial strength.
So what is the most important thing you need to keep in mind when we're talking about setting up these drives? So is there something to worry about as far as keeping data and log files separate or tempDB separate? Or what are the things you need to think about there?
Yeah, like we see on the slide there, you want to separate log files and data file activity. So that's clearly, especially for a heavy workload, one of the most important design considerations.
Cool.
You're still going to have to come up with RAID levels for each of the storage units that you allocate. You have a lot of choices. And some of you are hardware savvy. Others are maybe coming along learning your hardware.
Yep.
I have a link here to, well, it calls itself raid.edu. So if you want to learn the difference between RAID 10, RAID 0+1, RAID 6, RAID 5, etc., there's some nice little multimedia graphics. I like to give that out to my students.
Cool. What about separation of data files themselves? Anything that we need to think about there?
In fact, yes. Looking at a more advanced database design, we'll see that this will involve multiple file groups which are supported by at least one file, possibly multiple files.
Okay.
And as you can see from the diagram here, part of the point is positioning space-occupying objects over different file groups.
Okay.
So using the principle of spreading, I now can spread out the I/O and querying activity and the maintenance activity over multiple read-write heads. I have a general rule, though.
What would that be?
General rule is for every single file that I'm going to add to a database, better be on its own drive letter.
That kind of makes sense, because otherwise, what's the sense in having multiple files?
I'm going to have the same read-write heads fighting for the same data file activity. Now, even though my diagram shows multiple log files, it's only so that you know you can. This is not a recommended procedure. It's only going to be used if the first one fills up.
Yeah,
So-
the only time I've ever really seen that used is to migrate from a transaction log from one drive to another, is really what that helps out with.
Yeah.
So,
Now I want to spy, before we go to the next slide, I want to spy into one particular circumstance. Notice that I could have, let's say, a table in one file group and a non-clustered index in another file group, but observe the top of the diagram where I could actually have one single table spread out over multiple file groups.
multiple file groups?
Multiple file groups. Now, the reason that I'm going to go to this design to begin with would be twofold.
Okay.
Performance, meaning more read-write heads involved in reading and writing. That part I already brought out. But maintenance, I have smaller units of maintenance that can be done over, well, smaller units.
Awesome. Awesome. So is there anything else that you would use multiple file groups for, George?
I can back up one file or one file group at a time as well.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, so let's say I had, let's say I had, you know, a multi-terabyte database. I might want to back that up in pieces, maybe one file per day, one file group per day. I'll tell you from experience, though, if you go to that more advanced design, you better model your disaster recovery.
Oh, yeah.
You want to have a military drill where you really know how to do this.
Yep.
Just deviating from the plan here a little bit, I find that every time there's a disaster situation, there's always some X factor, something that wasn't accounted for, something that changed, and it's tough enough to get it right, or tough enough of a situation. You know, by the time you start adding X factors plus other problems, you just want to avoid that.
Yeah, and by the way, we are going to be talking a lot more about that later on today in a module coming up. That would be the one on managing data, so stay tuned for that as well. George, are file groups used at all in partitioning?
They are, and in fact, we'll see from the diagram here, not to go into too much detail, but this shows the primary building blocks that are involved in creating a table that's divided among file groups. So I have to have file groups, we see that in green, and then I have to have a partition function, partition scheme. Finally, I make a table that then leans on all the other dependencies. So again, the purpose is to spread, maybe I have one partition with many gigs of archive data. I'm not going to load data into that partition. I'm not going to change the data in that partition. So I can have that on. Maybe I don't even back that up quite as regularly. And then I have another partition. Maybe that's where I load my regular data into.
Awesome.
I can also have index maintenance performed on a partition by partition basis. So for particularly large tables, this would be a design idea. Now I have a couple of links down there, which for those that are interested in finding out more, very practically applied code and examples of how to load data into a current partition, fold that into an existing partition, make a new one for the next load cycle. I think you'll find that interesting.
Super. So have you got something to show us now on
I do.
Doing some design?
I do.
And some creation here?
Sure. We'll take a look first at creating a database with an advanced design using the graphical user interface. Now, the first thing that we'll observe is that we can create containers of files. Let's say we have an archive file group.
So the containers are the file groups, right?
The containers of objects, or those that hold objects, are file groups. So I can make a couple of file groups, go back to my General tab, and now I can add one or more files and add them to a particular file group. Now, just for typing simplicity in that, I'm going to give fairly non-descriptive names.
Normally you would want to name it something that applies to, that has meaning to you.
Good suggestion. So thanks for letting me off the hook here, Rich.
That's all right. We'll let you get away from it this time.
This time.
And it also helps if you name the database too, huh?
Oh, yeah, you know, wouldn't that help? Fancy DB.
There we go.
Yeah, now we're good. Okay, so this is for row data. Alrighty, now, from this point on, this is where I could now create objects. In fact, let me go over here.
So the objects are specified to a particular file group when they're created?
Exactly. This is exactly where I'm headed. Now, we'll find in just a moment, in fact, that's exactly what I'm going to show. Now, for this next part, I want to simulate a more advanced database design, but to do so, I have to make or simulate the creation of lots of drive letters.
So we don't have lots of disk drives, so you're going to create directories that just simulate their existence.
So I just have a virtual machine here.
Perfect.
I don't want to make all the storage for all that. That's fine. So next up, you'll observe as I scroll through this, I have multiple data files, multiple file groups in those files, and only to be crazy, not to show necessarily good design, Notice every file can have an individual initial size, max size, growth, all of that. Okay, so let me finish creating this. And refreshing, there is now my advanced design database. And if I go to properties, we'll go to file groups. Notice multiple file groups. If I go to files, all beautiful naming conventions. At least naming conventions. All right.
Awesome.
Now, to finish the drama of the story, notice I can create, actually, I have to go back for just a second. One confusion that I think people often have is confusing the default file group versus the primary. And you're good about pointing out, Rich, that the primary file group holds system objects, system tables, the record keeping of the database and such. And when I only have one file group, the primary, well, guess which one's the default?
Yeah, that's pretty easy. It would be primary.
Exactly. So
what if you don't want everything going into primary, though?
Yeah, a general design rule of thumb is that if I'm going to have even one file group beyond the primary, then set that one as the default file group. But I have an object lesson here. Let's take a look. You know me and my object lessons. So I'm now going to execute a table creation here, and we're going to play investigator and find out where it might exist.
Okay.
So I'll get properties. I'll get properties on this, and I go to storage and observe the file group that it went on is the default file group.
Okay.
This time around, I'm going to designate the particular file group that it goes on, and I have a rule of thumb I tell my students often. SQL Server doesn't do what you want it to do, it does what you tell it to do.
Okay.
And if I told it to go on a particular file group, well, guess what?
It went there.
It did exactly that. So there we go.
Awesome.
All right.
All right, so that was pretty good. But one of the things you mentioned in there is putting objects in the right file group, making sure that they go to where you expect them to. Is there a reason for that? Like maybe we keep running out of space or something?
That's right. So our next topic, we're going to take a look at planning for growth and capacity. We'll see that as a responsibility of the database administrator, there are two particular pitfalls you want to try to avoid when it comes to growth and space. We'll look at those. And as far as major responsibilities, managing space, we'll take a look at how to grow files manually, how to set up auto growth, and some other just general space-related behaviors.
All right. So what are the biggest things that can go wrong?
The good news is there are only really two primary space errors that you can create. I either fill up a file, log file or data file.
Makes sense.
Or I fill up a whole drive letter.
That's a little harder to do.
It has happened, certainly, and in particular, this is even worse for a machine which has more than just a SQL Server role that may mess up other operations, so to say.
So what are the ways that you can kind of take care of making sure that a file doesn't run out of space?
Well, this is a lead-in, a beautiful lead-in, actually, towards our automation lesson, which will come up later. But if I am aware of a space problem, I can easily solve it before it becomes a problem. Notice, as I'm showing here, I can get properties of a database, pick a particular file, just grow the size.
All right.
As long as I have the space, that's not hard. But you know one of my rules of thumb. If I have to do something once,
you're going to have to do it more than once.
I'm probably going to have to do it again, so I might as well have a code-based version of that. Stay tuned for a version later.
And is there a way where maybe you don't have to intervene all the time?
In fact, let's take a look at Autogrow options, and we'll see that on a file-by-file basis, we can set up Autogrow. I do want to say, we know some DBAs out there that will have strong feelings about whether this might be appropriate or not, and I try to take a balanced approach. What I mean by that is, for a small workload, why put my hand in the metal moving machinery?
Yep.
just let it auto grow. But if you do, make sure you have an auto grow percentage large enough so that it won't happen frequently, and use percentage. If you're going to buy into auto grow, that would be that should be the way you do it.
Good.
For other workloads, maybe very large workloads, some are very strong-minded about saying this is not a good idea and you should only handle this growth that is via the automation subsystem. Namely because I don't control when SQL Server starts to run out of space and decides, hey, everybody, you have to wait, and now I have to grow.
So would it be safe to say that you manage it manually, but you allow it to grow automatically in cases of emergency?
You know, I'm really tough on blanket statements. I'm going to say generally yes.
All right.
Yeah. I want to deviate and show something, deviate from the quick little plan here. If I go to the model database and quickly get properties and options, we'll review options later on, we'll see a couple of auto categories. You know what? I lost my mind for a second. I was thinking of something else. It's that easy.
It happens.
Never mind. Never mind. Different movie.
One good thing about it, George?
Yeah.
You got the peanut gallery laughing on that one.
Yeah. Totally lost my mind.
All right.
I don't even have my kids here to blame.
All right. Let's go back to this auto growth and growth thing there. Is there a way to monitor?
There is. In fact, there are multiple ways to monitor. It's funny just how many ways you can solve problems with this product. So the first thing you'd have to do is determine when you're going to grow, but be aware of it. So we have agent jobs, automation that we can set up. We'll see that later. We can set up alerts, so we have even a self-healing mechanism. I don't want to give away too much of the movie, but we'll see that later.
Save it for later.
All right. We can collect data about storage in the management data warehouse.
Okay.
We're going to look at that later. We have catalog views, dynamic management views, stored procedures. Let's just say we have no shortage of ways to determine space.
Awesome. Now, I know databases typically grow forever, right? But, yeah, what happens if somebody comes to you and says, hey, we're running out of space and all that? What do we do?
We are able to. Let's just say that. You're able to, you're able to attempt to shrink a file if you want to. Now, I've not met one database professional, I don't think ever, that's recommended this, but just know you can shrink or attempt to shrink either database-wide or on the basis of a specific data file. You get more control when you use attempt to shrink a specific data file.
Yeah, rarely, if ever, have I ever seen a database get smaller as it keeps on getting bigger.
And if you have a sense of humor, Rich, isn't it kind of like everything? Everything wants to grow.
Oh, yeah.
The stuff in your closet, the government, companies, everything wants to grow. Databases tend to grow too.
Oh, yeah.
Alrighty.
Absolutely. So how about we go take a look at some of this stuff there, bud? What do you think?
There we go.
All right. So you're going to show us how to make the data files bigger at this point?
That's right. So one of the databases that we have is our little tiny database. I'll get properties on it, go to files. Ooh, it has all of 4 whole megs allocated to it. Let's say we go to 25 whole megs. Let's raise our log file size as well. So as long as I am, well, on top of the situation, I can go ahead and assign new sizes. Everything is just dandy. Now, for a little bit of dramatic value. Hold on.
I don't like drama, George.
All right. We might be in the wrong room then.
Son of a gun. All right, keep going then. Keep going.
Let's go to disk usage.
Okay.
So these are built-in reports to Management Studio. I didn't need to do anything with reporting services, etc. So now we can see the full size of the data files, etc., and other activities down here. I just want to make sure everybody knows about this. I don't really want to go into the detail of the report.
Very cool.
Now, also here, let's just take this down a little bit. And Danny, how visible is this? Is this a little bit small? Okay, I'll try to adjust that for the next time around. Notice using the alter database statement, I'm able to dictate the size of a data file, and I can use that to grow. Looking a little bit closer, you'll see it's about 100 meg. So execute that. Now, to play Doubting Thomas, so to say, let's go to Files.
Doesn't exist if you show it, right?
That's right. So we see that we have 100 megs there. And then also, should I go back to my report, you'll see the report also immediately updates. Boom.
Cool.
Okay.
Cool.
So that is our drama value for the moment.
All right. So you had one more topic that we wanted to talk about in here, and that one is going to be service accounts.
That's right. Talk about another area where some people will have some passionate feeling. There's a lot of passionate people in the SQL Server community.
Yeah, you have to be.
Let's take a look at our topics for this section.
All right.
First of all, depending on the services or features that you elect to install, the services often come along with those.
Okay.
And along with that, you have to pick a service account for those services. Strangely, when was the last time a Microsoft product removed a feature in a future version? That doesn't happen too often.
No, that doesn't happen often at all.
There was a button in earlier versions of SQL Server installation where you could say, have every single service use the same user account.
That seems like it would make it a lot easier for the DBA to manage.
It would if that was the choice you actually wanted.
Oh!
So we'll see that there are reasons to pick different service accounts for different services. Let's take a closer look here.
All right. So what are some of the choices that you've got?
Kind of a quick funny story. One of my kids accused me of being or acting like the Godfather, Don Vito Corleone. It was kind of a funny little situation, but I'm going to act like Don Vito, and I'm going to back you into a corner, giving you only one possible decision here.
I hate it when he does this to me.
So here we go. We
Okay.
have two general account decisions. We can either use a built-in account, and you see the laundry list of accounts there.
Absolutely.
Or-
local service, network service.
Generally speaking, all of those are either going to give too many privileges or too few privileges.
Okay, so that basically rules all of them out.
Thank you very much.
Okay,
So this
next.
means you're going to have a created account, which will be either on the local SQL Server machine in that SAM server security accounts manager,
Yep.
or you're going to use a domain account.
Okay.
And because the service accounts, well, in particular, some may need to crawl out across the network, access other resources, you're going to use a domain account.
Okay, so can I use the same domain account for all of them?
Excellent. Excellent question, that is. We'll just get to the quick part of the story. You're going to use a different account for every single box, meaning if I have 100 database engine instances, it is worth the pain of creating every individual account for every instance of the database engine.
Well, that is the recommendation. That's cool. So what happens if 6 months from now you've got some new stuff and you need to change it?
Excellent. So you'll see from installation or the screenshot here that you can make those choices during installation, but you can use SQL Server Configuration Manager after the fact should you have a design change, a policy change, or something like that. You know the rule of thumb, though, when it comes to changing services.
Tell me, George.
You're not going to use the normal Windows Management Console for managing services. You're going to use SQL Server Configuration Manager.
And why is that?
Let's see. You had a good phrase for that yesterday. What was that? Basically, all the appropriate security gets assigned when you use the SQL Configuration Manager.
And
Is that a
if
good
you
summary?
And if you use the Windows Services applet, it doesn't do what SQL needs it to do. So you end up having to do it manually. So what are some of the rules that go into choosing those service accounts, George?
Yep. The database engine in general is not going to need any fancy privileges, so just create a I call it a dum-dum user, name it appropriately, don't give it any special privileges, domain account.
Okay.
Some of the other services, browser, full text, don't even bother. Just leave the default accounts that are suggested during installation. Now, one of the bigger ones is the agent.
Okay.
The agent has to touch other stuff, so it may have to touch mailboxes, file system shares, other SQL servers, so that you're going to give its own account and assign whatever privileges that account needs. I have a link here, configure Windows service accounts and permissions. If you're willing to throw off the hockey gloves and do a little, get open-minded about what their suggestions are, that might be of interest to you.
Awesome. So can we go take a look at that real quick?
Sure, last little bit here. We'll see now. And I think I put my taskbar up at the top. Yeah.
Oh, that's
tricky,
cool.
tricky.
I like that. I'll bet most people don't even know you can do that.
So I'm going to go to All Programs, SQL Server 2012. By the way, if I lose my mind and forget that later, don't forget to tell me. I won't be embarrassed. All right, SQL Server Configuration Manager. So general rule of thumb in Windows, select to effect.
That makes sense.
General rule number 2, when in doubt in Windows, right-click.
There you go.
So let's say it was the SQL Server agent service of the marketing instance whose account I would want to change. I'd go to Properties, click on Browse. Now make sure you're going to browse for the account from the appropriate location. You might need to point to an Active Directory domain. And from there, pick the appropriate account. Lo and behold, oh, M for Mia. That's right. Mia as in Miami. So I would have an agent account created for this particular machine. Click on OK. Quick little security note. I can't change the account if I don't know the password.
Awesome.
So that's just a built-in feature. And that's really all we had for this session. So we looked at taking putting SQL Server on a good footing, looking at the major installation decisions. And now that we'll have SQL Server on a good footing, in the next session, we'll take a look at what changes we might make post-installation, configuration changes and such.
Awesome. So we're going to take a short break now. We'll be back at the top of the hour. Enjoy. See you in a bit.